Hello Year 10, hope you're all well. This is a new lesson moving away from section A of paper 2. This is a new lesson that's designed to introduce you to the different forms and purposes of writing that you could encounter in paper 2 question 5, that's section B of your English GCSE English language exam. So hopefully it'll be very, very useful for you. Do get a pen and notepad ready for you. And I should say at this point that this lesson is designed to be used in conjunction with the series of lessons that Mrs. Olsen has been making that introduce you to the different skills involved with your actual written response for this section of the exam. So please do start with this lesson as an introduction and then go on to Mrs. Olsen's lessons after that. Hopefully you'll find it useful. Okay, so paper 2 section B, or paper 2 question 5, a little bit about what you are going to receive and expect. First of all, the focus is non-fiction writing. All right, now in paper 1 section B, that's where you get your task that looks at imaginative or fiction or narrative writing. So that's your descriptive writing. But in paper 2, it's non-fiction writing. Now, the other thing is that in paper 2, section B, you only get one task. There is no choice. In paper 1, section B, they give you a choice of 2 tasks and you pick the one that you prefer. But with paper 2, there is just one task and everybody attempts the same one. Now, the good news is that the 2 extracts that you will have studied and done lots of work on in section A of the exam will be loosely linked topic-wise to the task that you get set, your writing task. So say, for example, your 2 extracts were about, I don't know, bungee jumping. It might be that the writing task in section B is somehow related to adventure sports or extreme sports. So there will be a link between the topic of the extracts that you've been working through in section A and the task of section B. The other good news is that you will be given a specific form and purpose for your writing, and you'll get a sense of who the audience is. The task will make that quite clear for you, and this lesson will help you really unpick what that means by form, purpose, and audience. This is important. Obviously, how much is it worth? It's 40 marks in total, so it's, it's very, very significant in terms of your overall exam. AO5 is worth 24 marks, and that's for your content, what you actually write, and how you organise and structure that writing. There are 16 marks available, that's AO6, for your technical accuracy. So that's your spelling, your punctuation, your grammar, your vocabulary, etc., etc. And just to remind you again, this is more of an introduction to different forms and purposes of writing, but please, please do use this lesson in conjunction with Mrs. Olsen's paper 2 writing lessons as well, and that will really, really help you out. Okay, right, so this is the point where you really should be starting to take some notes and get some advice. When you get that exam paper with section B's task, the writing task in front of you, the very first thing you should think about, and you can write it down at the top of your paper, is PAFT. All right, PAFT. What is the PAFT for this task? All right, and that stands for purpose. What is the purpose of writing here? Why would I have to write this text? Is it to persuade someone of something? Is it to argue my viewpoint? Is it to just purely give information? So that's the purpose. The A stands for audience. Who is this piece of writing for? Have you been told it's for students? Have you been told it's for adults, etc., etc.? F is the form. Now that means what type of text is it? Is it a letter? Is it a newspaper article? Is it the text for a speech, etc., etc.? So more on that to come in a minute. And finally, the T stands for tone. What would be the suitable tone for this task? Do you want to write in a way that sounds friendly? Is it helpful and calm? Is it very serious and formal? Can it be funny? Can it be sarcastic in places? So you need to think about the suitable tone for the task that you have been given. So that is P-A-F-T or PAFT. Right, this is what an actual exam paper might look like for that section B question 5 task. All right, so we'll read it through together and just sort of break down the typicality of the kind of task you might get in your actual exam. So you're advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. You should write in full sentences. Hopefully you obviously would do that anyway. You're reminded of the need to plan your answer. Again, Mrs. Olson's lessons might help you more with that, and you should leave enough time to check your work at the end. Then they'll give you some kind of statement, and it'll be quite lengthy. There'll be, plenty in there to engage with, but here's the topic statement. Homework has no value. Some students get it done for them, some don't do it at all. Students should be relaxing in their free time. And then the task comes below it. Write an article for a broadsheet newspaper in which you explain your point of view on this statement. So in terms of PAFT, remember I've always got to think PAFT. Right, well I can see already that explain is my purpose. So I'm writing to explain. I'm not writing to persuade. I'm not writing to argue. I'm writing to explain. So the audience, the AFT, it's a broadsheet newspaper. Now a broadsheet newspaper is a newspaper that is more formal and tends to be for more educated readers, and we can assume adults here. So in terms of my audience, I need to be quite formal to them. I can use the best vocabulary I possibly can, and they're probably quite educated as well, so I can be very, very sort of serious in my approach to this. F, right, well we know as well the form, it's an article. It's a broadsheet newspaper article. And T, the tone, well, it's about homework. It's for a broadsheet newspaper. So I think I could afford to be both serious and light-hearted, maybe even a bit of humour in there in terms of my tone. But I'll think more about that in a minute. So that's how I'm breaking it down and making sure I am happy that I know what the PAFT, the PAFT is for this particular task. Right, okay, so back to tone. You've been given a topic area, and do take some notes from this slide, and you can always pause and come back to it if you need to. Is the issue or the topic that you've been given, is it serious? Is it quite a light-hearted issue? Is it quite an urgent or important issue? Do you think you need to sound concerned about this issue, or can you talk about it in quite a relaxed way? Do you personally feel very strongly about this topic? Does it make you angry or a bit defiant? Do you think that it's a topic where you could afford to make your audience laugh a bit so you can write in quite a jokey or light-hearted way? How can those language features that we know all about help me achieve the tone I want to write in? Can I be sarcastic? Is there any place for sarcasm in your writing? And also, and this is an important one, particularly for those that like to sort of challenge themselves, is your tone able to change during your writing? Maybe you'll start off quite serious and then the tone will shift to become more light-hearted, or maybe you'll go from angry to sarcastic. So have a think about how the tone might shift in your writing. Here are some tone words to help you think about voice, the kind of voice you want to create in your piece of writing. So you might want to sound angered, concerned, friendly, doubtful, hopeful, enthusiastic, sarcastic, humorous, supportive, aggressive, thoughtful, academic, alarmed, encouraging, or serious. Okay, right, so in terms of tone, here's a mini task for you to just think about and just engage with in your head. You don't need to necessarily write anything down if you don't want to. So I'm going to read you an extract from a letter, and it's a letter to Theresa May, our former Prime Minister, as you know. And I want you to think, what tone has this letter got? What tone has this student written in? And there are some words below that you might want to use, or you might pick some of these to suit the tone that this student has written in. Dear Theresa May, One of the only arguments I've actually heard anyone actually make in favour of your last-minute shambles of a Brexit proposal is that we need to forget that you are a cold-hearted, ruthless and self-serving Tory and back your Brexit proposal because it wouldn't be as economically damaging as a no-deal flounce out of the EU. This argument has a kernel of truth because the economic chaos of a no-deal meltdown would undoubtedly be worse than the illogical and almost universally unpopular mess you and your Tory mates have cobbled together. So there you go, have a think. What tone can you identify in this extract? Hopefully it's not too difficult to see that this is someone who is quite angry. They're being a bit sarcastic, it's a bit aggressive in times, it's very dubious. It's not so much funny as kind of angry funny. You've got words like flounce, you've got mess, you've got the fact that the Tory mates have cobbled something together, you've got the word shambles, you've got cold-hearted, ruthless, self-serving. All of these words create that sense of negativity, don't they? So again, use that example to think, well, is that an appropriate tone for the task that I'm attempting or not? And how can I choose my words and use my language in a way that helps to create the right tone for my writing? Okay, right, so again, get your pens and paper ready for this one. This is a breakdown of what those different forms and purposes of writing are that you need to know. So the different forms that the exam board expect you to know and understand how to use the conventions of are letters, articles, now that could be a magazine article or a newspaper article, the text of a speech, so not the actual verbal, but the words that would be delivered verbally. The text for a leaflet or an essay. Okay, so they are the different forms that the exam board expect you to be familiar with and be able to use the conventions of. Purposes, writing to explain / inform. I've put those together because they pretty much are one and the same. Argue, so writing to argue and all the conventions that go with that. Writing to persuade or writing to advise. These are the purposes that are most likely to be presented to you, just one of those in your exam. And then audiences. What kind of audiences might you be given a hint at who the task is for? So it might be a task that you can tell is for adults. It might be a task that is specifically designed to be for students. It might be for someone very senior or managerial, a head teacher, or a person in charge of a company. The audience could be teenagers or friends or your peers. It could also be less sophisticated readers or more sophisticated readers. Now a clue there would be with tabloid newspapers versus broadsheet newspapers. Tabloid newspapers tend to have less sophisticated readers, and broadsheet newspapers tend to have more sophisticated readers, where your vocabulary, your register would be more formal and more complex. But again, just think about the task you've been given and have a good think about who the audience is so that you can adapt your writing to suit them. Okay, so we're quickly going to whiz through these different forms now, all right? Now, it shouldn't be too challenging and you should know quite a lot of this already, but just to go through the basics, I'm not going to cover absolutely everything about these different forms, but the basics that the exam board are expecting you to kind of know and understand. So with a letter, the use of addresses, the exam board like it when you have the addresses at the top. I will show you an example in a second. A date, a letter should always have a date. It should also have a formal mode of address if the task suits it, which it probably will. So dear sir or madam, if it's quite formal, or if it's a named person, then dear Mr. So-and-so or dear Jim or whoever it might be. The paragraphs, it is essential that they have to be sequenced. They have to be well sequenced. So a clear opening and the paragraphs are well developed and move on from each other really nicely and cohesively. Your points should be well developed, with some detail there. And my advice is always to have a strong opening and a strong ending with that appropriate mode of signing off. So that formality of yours sincerely or yours faithfully. I'll tell you now the difference between the two. If you know the name of the person that you are writing to, so say you are writing to, I don't know, dear Mr. Scott, you can sign off with yours sincerely. It's still formal, but there's that relationship that's established by the fact that you know that person's name. If it's someone who you don't know the name of, so you are just writing dear sir or madam at the start, you sign it off with yours faithfully. A clue that I was taught when I was much younger is that it's the two F's. So formal equals faithfully. Formal equals faithfully. That's how I kind of remembered how to do it. So that's the form of a letter. Now, this is kind of what it might look like on your page of your exam. This is a really nice example of someone who has used the form very, very well. So we've got the address at the top, we've got a date, we've got the address of the person who the letter is going to. Now, clearly, these addresses can be totally fictional and should be. So just make them up. Don't try and be funny or clever or too clever with them, but just make up random addresses. That's absolutely fine. It should have the dear, so dear sir or madam or whoever it's to. You'll see that there's introductory paragraphs. The paragraphs are quite well developed and they are linked with connectives. This is so important. So if you're using words like secondly, moreover, furthermore, in addition, at the start of each paragraph, you are providing a structure, a sequence for your reader to guide them through your letter. You'll see there's a final paragraph and then it closes off with yours sincerely or yours faithfully, as I've just explained. Now, the thing with a letter is that most of the time when letters are sent, they're quite formal. So you do need to really bring out those brilliant words, that extensive vocabulary that you should know by now, partly from your vocabulary lessons, and that tone needs to be, appropriate and appropriately serious if the task is something that's quite a serious issue. So that's a letter for you. Okay, moving on to articles, the basic features of an article that the exam board are looking for. Lots of students forget this, but the first one is a title. An article in a newspaper or a magazine will always have a title, and you can instantly hook your examiner if your title is witty, if it's original, if it uses maybe some alliteration and is also a rhetorical question, something that instantly engages the attention of the examiner straight away. Subheadings, you don't have to use these, but subheadings can work really nicely in an article, particularly a magazine article that tend to be more kind of boxed or sectioned out. Any article should have an overview paragraph at the start or an introductory paragraph that's going to outline, the reason for this article, what it's going to be about. Again, the importance of those effectively and fluently sequenced paragraphs. There needs to be a real structure and sequence to your article about whatever topic it is that you're writing about. And again, I cannot stress this enough, strong opening and strong ending. Remember, that opening is the first thing your examiner is going to read and the ending is going to be the final thing they read. So you have to make a good impression. So making sure you've got that strong opening and ending is really, really important. Okay, a little bit more about articles. I decided to give you some more notes here. We've already said clear sense of structure, range of language devices to engage the reader. It does depend on whether it's a newspaper article, therefore you don't want lots of lists of three and similes and metaphors maybe. But do think about which language devices would be suitable to really engage your reader. Quotations, newspaper articles particularly, they often include quotes from experts, commentators or witnesses. And again, they're totally made up, but it's a nice touch to include those. Paragraphing. Vary the length of them. They don't all need to be clunky the same length. You could have some longer paragraphs and some shorter ones. Do use punctuation for impact as well as precision. So dashes, ellipsis, question marks. And by the way, that goes for any writing that you do, I must say. The other thing about articles is they may use direct address. You might decide that you want to write your article, talking to the reader directly, and that might engage them personally. And you will look at plenty of examples of these in the run up to your exams. The other thing I did want to point out is that they can be often lively, punchy or assertive in tone. They don't have to be very formal and dull. Obviously, it depends upon the purpose and the topic and the audience, but it is important to think about tone. Newspaper articles tend to be more formal than magazine articles. Therefore, the tone of your article may depend on the topic and audience for your writing. If you're writing an article for a magazine about teenagers and what kind of keeps them awake at night, you can afford to be funny, you can be lively, you can be humorous. Whereas if you're writing a newspaper article about a very formal or serious issue, you probably want to ease back on that liveliness, and the humour. Okay, moving on to speeches. Speeches are quite common, they come up quite a lot. Here's the basic features of the form that the exam board are looking for. Clearly, you've got to be speaking to an audience. Talk to them. Use those pronouns like you, us, we, I. Remember, when you're writing a speech, it's designed to be delivered to people that are stood there in front of you. So you need to make them feel like you are talking to them. Effective or fluently linked sections to indicate the sequence or the order of the points you're trying to make. Again, use those connectives like secondly, furthermore, moreover, etc., etc. Rhetorical indicators. Make this speech something that's quite impassioned. Use rhetorical questions. Use those red map forest features, similes, metaphors, alliteration. Can you imagine a world where, etc., etc. The best speeches are written with really careful thought to those rhetorical features that will engage your audience. And as before, a strong opening and ending with a clear and appropriate sign-off. Remember, it's a speech, not an article or a letter. So, thank you for listening. Leave them thinking. Maybe finish your speech with a rhetorical question and then a good night. But leave your audience thinking. You need to have an impact on your audience, and think about that when you are writing those words. Okay, the text of a leaflet does come up. You could be asked to do this. Basic features of the form. First off, once again, a bit like an article, it should have a title. If you are writing the text for a leaflet, then give it a title. You may also want to use subheadings. So the other thing is, with titles, make them interesting. Try and be a bit original. Try and be quite lively. So, for example, how to avoid meltdown, a student's guide. There's some humour, there's some lightheartedness in that as a title. Back to subheadings. Leaflets tend to use subheadings quite a lot, or sections of bullet points. That's absolutely fine. If the form you are given is the text of a leaflet, then don't be afraid to use subheadings or bullet points. In fact, I would recommend it. That doesn't mean don't write proper paragraphs of text. Please do. And these should be effectively, fluently sequenced, but you might want to mix it up with some shorter sections of bullet points, etc., etc. Please don't do sketches or colour any of it in, create this lovely headline, in bright pink. You won't get any marks for it, and it is a waste of your time. So please don't do that. And finally, the essay form. Again, you could get asked to write an essay about a topic. In terms of basic features of an essay, well, you write them all the time for all your subjects, so you are familiar with this form already. But they should definitely have an effective introduction and a convincing conclusion. Remember, strong opening, strong ending is always important. As before, it's that paragraphing. Take your reader on a guide throughout your essay, explore your points and lead towards an ending. But a great essay must also take into account an extensive and impressive vocabulary. Use all those big words, really spend time with a dictionary or doing vocabulary tasks where you can. A clear structure, a variety and control of sentence structures, and a clear awareness of purpose and audience. Okay, right, so moving on now to purposes. We've gone through the different forms of writing, so you might want to pause at this point and just check that you are happy with letter, article, speech, essay, etc. We're now going to move on to just running through the different purposes of non-fiction writing. So first off, writing to argue. I love writing to argue. It's possibly my favourite purpose of writing for non-fiction. When you are writing to argue, you are giving the case for one side of a debate. However, in doing so, and this is really, really important that you write this down, you have to acknowledge those counter-arguments. You need to be aware and acknowledge the fact that other arguments that go against yours do exist, but then you shoot those down to make your own argument stronger. All right, so you can make your point, you can make your first key point in the argument that you're making, then introduce what someone else might say against you, but then shoot that down to make your argument stronger. All right, and that's a key part of writing to argue. So in writing to argue, you tend to find, obviously, counter arguments, rhetorical questions, facts and statistics, emotive language, depending on the topic, anecdotes. They're very, very useful. An anecdote is a true or made up story that helps you get your point across. Strong modal verbs like must, will, rather than those weaker ones like might and could. And again, I'll link you back to a red map forest, the writing acronym that helps you with those techniques that will make your writing powerful and engaging. So remember, with writing to argue, you are presenting your opinions around a topic, but you are also aware that other arguments to yours exist. You're acknowledging those, but then you are shooting those down and you are kind of dissing those arguments so that your opinion seems to be the one that is strongest, okay? It's not the same as writing to persuade. All right, writing to persuade means you are only talking about your own opinions. You are trying to convince someone of your own opinion, whereas writing to argue means that you are acknowledging and you're showing awareness of other people's ideas as well. So that's writing to argue, a really, really common, often comes up in the exam, but a really lovely, lovely purpose for writing. Okay, here is an example. It's always good to see some examples of these different writing purposes. So this is an extract from Greta Thunberg's speech about the importance of fighting climate change. It's a great example of writing to argue. So just for yourself and for your own learning, as I read this, and as you read it with me, consider what techniques she's used, but also consider why it's writing to argue rather than writing to persuade. See if you can spot how we can tell that it's writing to argue. Every time we make a decision, we should ask ourselves, how will this decision affect that curve? We should no longer measure our wealth and success in the graph that shows economic growth, but in the curve that shows the emissions of greenhouse gases. We should no longer only ask, have we got enough money to go through with this? But also, have we got enough of the carbon budget to spare to go through with this? That should and must become the centre of our new currency. Many people say that we don't have any solutions to the climate crisis. And they are right. Because how could we? How do you solve the greatest crisis that humanity has ever faced? How do you solve a war? How do you solve going to the moon for the first time? How do you solve inventing new inventions? The climate crisis is both the easiest and the hardest issue we have ever faced. The easiest because we know what we must do. We must stop the emissions of greenhouse gases. So again, at this point, you might want to pause it. You might want to make some notes about how that piece of writing, that speech from Greta, fits that criteria for writing to argue, and also the techniques that she's used that you think are most effective there. Okay, writing to explain. Writing to explain or inform is basically explaining your opinion about something to the reader. It's not being passionately argumentative. You are not convincing people that your opinion is correct. You're not offering them advice about something. You are merely explaining in detail and with developed ideas your view about something. So, key features you often tend to find in explain writing. You do tend to find facts and statistics. You know, it's meant to be informative. So facts and statistics are often there. Opinions, you will find these, but they are carefully presented. And the tone will be neutral and unbiased. It will get across, it will convey your opinions on the topic, but is largely informative. However, even though that sounds quite boring, it doesn't have to and really shouldn't be boring. You can still use all those lovely language techniques. Let me show you how. Here's an example for you. The exam task was explain a decision you have made that has had a major impact on your life. All right, explain a decision you have made that has a major impact on your life. And this is the example. You will see that it isn't argumentative, it's not persuasive, it's not giving advice, it's explaining. Choosing which university I was going to apply to was, by far, the biggest challenge of my life so far. I had heard vague stories from friends and family about the UCAS process and open days, whatever they were, so when we were hit like a sledgehammer with the request to complete our personal statement for our university application, I dived at full speed into panic mode. It was clear I just hadn't given it the thought that a decision like this needed. I wasn't ready, yet I had to be. The deadline was fast approaching and I needed to make a decision. Fast. Okay, so again, at this point, it might be quite nice to pause here, think about what this student has done, look at the language techniques that they've used, think about the tone that this piece of writing has, think about the way the sentences have been written and shaped to still engage the reader whilst doing what the task is asked, which is to explain something. Okay, writing to persuade. Now this is something that you should all be familiar with. You've done lots of this since even primary school. So persuasive writing is convincing someone that what you think is right, that you are correct with your viewpoint about something. So you have to use your language. It's all about using language as your weapon, if you like, to convince your reader that you are correct with something. Now this is where a red map forest really comes into its own. All right, so using anecdotes, rhetorical questions, emotive language, those pronouns, that direct address of you, we, us, I, metaphors and similes, alliteration, facts and statistics, exaggeration, hyperbole, where you go really over the top about something, repetition, opinions, and that tone, that real sense of a very assertive tone, so that people will think, well, of course they're right. Surely they're right. They can't not be right. All right, that's your aim with writing to persuade. Here's an example. It's an actual example taken from Chris Packham's speech when he presented Blue Planet Live a couple of years ago. So this is just a short extract from that. Think about what it is about Chris Packham's speech that makes this persuasive. Our planet isn't defined by the colour of its poles, the yellow of the deserts, the green of the forests. Our planet is defined by the blue of the oceans. It's an ocean planet. Now, those space probes are 13 billion miles away out in space. And to date, no one or nothing has listened to that whale song. Nothing and no one is coming to save us. All this beautiful life we've got on planet, everything that scurries across the ground, everything that flies through the air, everything that swims through the ocean is in our hands. It's in our hands. Now we are the only ones who can make a difference. Who is the we? Who is the our? Well, that's me and you. That's me, we. Me, we. Me, we simply have to make a difference now. We've just got to. Okay, so again, good place to pause and just look back through that again. Identify the persuasive features that have been used here. Think about the vocabulary, think about the sentencing and the paragraphing and how all of that works to be persuasive and effective. Okay, final purpose, I believe, and it's writing to advise. Again, this is quite common. It's quite a nice piece of work to do. Sorry, I shouldn't use the word nice there for an English teacher. It's not a great word to use, sorry. But writing to advise. What is it? Writing to advise is really, really easy to do, but there are also some clear rules that you should try and follow. If you're doing a piece of advice writing, you are providing ways forward for someone. You are offering advice in the form of suggestions and encouragement. Now, it's really important that you are not telling someone what to do. Students can very easily make that mistake, but you are not telling them what to do, but giving someone a range of options and perhaps telling them what has worked for you or others in a similar situation. That's really effective advice writing then. So make some notes here. What are the key features? What does my writing need to feel like or look like in order to be effective? First off, modal verbs. These are really, really key for writing to advise. Now, you shouldn't use those really strong modal verbs. So you don't want to kind of use, you must do this, you will do this, because that's far too strong. Remember, you're not telling someone what to do, you're offering them gentle encouragement. So use those verbs like should, could, might. You know, they sort of suggest they're not so aggressive, they're not so assertive. So modal verbs appropriately is really, really important. Pronouns, using those you, he, she, they, I, we. All right, and again, it makes the reader feel that you are speaking to them and that they can trust you with your advice. Tone-wise, you've got to keep it empathetic and understanding. It has to be gentle, it has to be calm. You can be funny, you can afford to have some humour in there, but you don't want to have an angry or an aggressive tone. Anecdotes. This is really important. So true, and I say that in inverted commas because obviously you can make absolutely anything like this up. It doesn't have to be real, and it probably shouldn't be real really in order to be the best suited anecdote for the task, but true stories of yours or others' experiences in relation to the topic. So if it was a piece of advice writing about bullying, you might make up and include an anecdote about yourself or a friend of yours who had been the victim of bullying and what they had done to get themselves help and support. And imperative sentences. Now, this might seem strange given I've just told you not to kind of be too assertive, but imperative sentences are commands. So you could use this to actually help people to do something. So seek support from friends or family. So it's being quite firm, but at the same time, it's also being quite gentle and helping people take action. So they are some key features for writing to advise. And here is an example for you. So it's a guide. The exam task was write a guide, so the text for a guide for year 11s who are approaching exam season. And this is just an extract from a student's example. Are you in the juggernaut of a year that is year 11? If so, you might already be feeling a little overwhelmed at the anxiety-inducing prospect of where to go once your myriad of exams are complete. Never fear, help is at hand. This guide aims to reassure any anxieties you may have and give you some helpful hints on how best to prepare to leave school. Hopefully you'll see that that's quite a lovely example of advice writing. It's gentle, it's reassuring in its tone, but it also uses some really lovely vocabulary and some language features as well, which is exactly what the examiner wants to see. Okay, Year 10, so looking at this nearly final slide, the penultimate slide, I've just included here a knowledge organiser. You'll be able to pause this and kind of zoom in to see it in more detail, and at some point you should receive a printed version of this from your English teacher as well, but it guides you on one sheet towards the different types of writing, the different purposes of writing, and what to remember for paper 2 question 5. So just a bit of a signpost really to something that you will see in a much easier to read form quite soon when we get back to school. And finally, I really haven't covered everything in that, and that's not the point of that. It was an introduction to the different purposes and the different forms of writing and how to consider audience and tone as well. This link that I've provided on this final slide is the link to the BBC Bite-Size GCSE AQA English Language Writing Non-Fiction stuff, which is really, really lovely. So if you are stuck or if you don't quite understand what I meant about argue or advice conventions, then please check this out to get more support where needed. Hope that's been helpful. Apologies for any rambling, but good luck. And don't forget to use this PowerPoint in conjunction with Mrs. Olsen's lessons as well. Thanks, Year 10. Well done.